I was standing in my pumpkin patch, checking the vines for signs of powdery mildew, when I heard the sirens coming up the long gravel driveway. 2 patrol cars kicked up dust as they rolled toward me, their lights flashing against the October morning sun. I straightened up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and watched as 4 officers stepped out of their vehicles, looking around at the sprawling property with obvious confusion. "Are you Xavier Morrison?" the lead officer asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. "That's me," I said, pulling off my work gloves. "What's this about?" "We received a complaint about unauthorized farming activity and property encroachment. Someone named Patricia Henderson called it in about an hour ago." I couldn't help but laugh, which probably wasn't the best reaction when facing 4 police officers. Patricia Henderson. Of course it was Patricia. The woman had made it her personal mission to make my life difficult ever since I'd moved back to Apple Valley, Washington 3 months ago. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, gesturing at the acres of land stretching out around us. "This is my property, all of it." The lead officer, whose name tag Reed Martinez, pulled out a small notebook. "According to the complaint, you're operating a commercial pumpkin patch in violation of HOA regulations within the Riverside Meadows community." "Riverside Meadows?" I shook my head. "That's the housing development down by the main road. This is Morrison Orchards. My family has owned this land since 1947. Officer Martinez's partner, a younger woman named Officer Chen, was already looking at something on her phone. "Sir, the HOA president claims that your pumpkin operation extends into the community green space and common areas." I felt my jaw tighten. "That's absolutely not true. The property line is clearly marked. Riverside Meadows was built on what used to be part of the old Peterson farm about 15 years ago. My family sold them those 20 acres, but we kept everything else. We've got 200 acres here, including the original orchards, the newer vineyard section, and yes, this year I planted pumpkins on about 5 acres near the road." "Can you prove ownership?" Martinez asked, his tone professional but fair. "I've got all the documentation in my office." "Give me 5 minutes." They followed me to the main house, a restored 1920s farmhouse that my grandfather had built with his own hands. Inside, I pulled out the deed, survey maps, and property tax records. Officer Martinez studied them carefully while Officer Chen took photos with her phone. "This all looks legitimate," Martinez said finally. "Your property line is clearly marked here, and according to this survey, the nearest point of the HOA development is about 300 feet from where you're growing pumpkins." "So we're done here?" I asked. "As far as we're concerned, yes. But you might want to contact the HOA directly to clear this up. Sometimes these boundary disputes can get messy." After the officers left, I stood on my porch and looked down toward the main road where I could see the perfectly manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses of Riverside Meadows. I'd known moving back home wasn't going to be simple. When my father passed away 2 years ago, he'd left the property to me and my sister, but she had no interest in farming. She lived in Seattle with her family, working as a software engineer, and she'd been happy to sign over her share if I'd take on the responsibility of maintaining the land. I'd been living in Portland, working as an agricultural consultant, when I got the news about Dad. It took me a year to wrap up my business and another year to decide what I really wanted to do with my life. At 34, I wasn't getting any younger, and the idea of returning to my roots, literally, had become increasingly appealing. The orchards had been neglected during Dad's final years. He'd been sick for a while, and the property had suffered. I'd spent the past 3 months clearing dead trees, repairing irrigation systems, and trying to figure out what crops would be most profitable. The pumpkin patch had been an experiment, a way to generate some quick income while I planned the longer-term restoration of the apple and pear orchards. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, David Chen, who'd helped me with the property transfer. "Xavier, good to hear from you," David answered. "How's the farming life treating you? I just had 4 police officers show up because the HOA president claims I'm encroaching on their property." There was a pause. "The Riverside Meadows HOA, that's the one. Woman named Patricia Henderson." David groaned. "Oh, I know Patricia. She's notorious. My firm has handled 3 cases involving her in the past 5 years. She has this tendency to believe that HOA authority extends far beyond its actual legal boundaries. Well, she just sicks the cops on me over my pumpkin patch." "Did you show them your property documents?" "Yes, and they left satisfied, but I have a feeling this isn't over." "It probably isn't," David agreed. "Patricia has a pattern. She'll escalate, document everything, keep all your property records handy, and call me if she tries anything else. In the meantime, I'll send a formal letter to the HOA clarifying the property boundaries and warning them about harassment." I thanked him and hung up, but the peaceful morning I'd been enjoying was thoroughly ruined. I walked back down to the pumpkin patch, where about 3 dozen customers were wandering through the rows, picking out their Halloween pumpkins. I'd advertised on Facebook and put up a sign on the main road. It wasn't a huge operation, just a simple U-pick setup with a cash box on the honor system. My neighbor, old Fred Martinson, who owned the Christmas tree farm on the adjacent property, was standing by his fence, watching with amusement. "Saw the light show," he called out. "Patricia causing trouble again." I walked over. Fred was in his 70s, a weathered man who'd been farming longer than I'd been alive. "How'd you guess? That woman has been a thorn in everyone's side since they built that development. She tried to tell me I couldn't run my chainsaw before 9 in the morning during tree season, said it violated their community quiet hours." He shook his head. "Had to remind her that her community rules don't apply to my property." "What happened?" She threatened to sue. Never did, of course. It was all bluster, but she made a few more attempts after that. Tried to say my truck was an eyesore and demanded I park it somewhere it wouldn't be visible from the development. Told her she was welcome to plant trees on her side of the property line if she didn't like the view. Did she? Fred laughed. "No, but she did try to get the county to cite me for running a business in an agricultural zone. That one backfired on her pretty spectacularly when the zoning officer explained that my land is specifically designated for agricultural and forestry operations." I spent the rest of the morning helping customers and trying not to think about Patricia Henderson. But around 2 in the afternoon, a silver Lexus came speeding up my driveway, spraying gravel. A woman in her late 40s emerged, wearing expensive athletic wear and oversized sunglasses. Her highlighted blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she moved with the purposeful stride of someone who was used to getting her way. "Are you Xavier Morrison?" she demanded. "I am, and you must be Patricia Henderson. Mrs. Henderson to you. We need to discuss your illegal farming operation immediately." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "There's nothing illegal about farming on my own property, Mrs. Henderson. Your pumpkin patch is a nuisance and a violation of community standards. The increased traffic is disrupting our peaceful neighborhood. Your customers are parking along the main road, and frankly, the whole setup is bringing down property values. The main road is a public county road, and anyone can park there as long as they're not blocking traffic. As for property values and community standards, those only apply within your HOA, which is on your property, not mine." Her face reddened. Don't get smart with me, young man. I've been president of the Riverside Meadows HOA for 8 years, and I know exactly what I'm talking about. You're creating a commercial enterprise that's incompatible with our residential community. This is Morrison Orchards. My grandfather started this farm 78 years ago. Your development has been here for 15. I'm not part of your HOA. I've never been part of your HOA, and I never will be part of your HOA. We'll see about that, Patricia snapped. I've already contacted the county about your business license. I have all the necessary permits and licenses. Would you like to see them? I want to see you shut down this ridiculous pumpkin operation. It's attracting the wrong element to our community. The wrong element? I felt my temper rising. You mean families with kids who want to pick pumpkins? I mean outsiders who have no business being in this area. Just this morning, I saw at least 20 cars I didn't recognize. On a public road, coming to my property, which again has nothing to do with you or your HOA. Patricia pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the pumpkin patch, my barn, and the customers who were currently selecting pumpkins. Several people noticed and looked uncomfortable. Excuse me, but you're on my private property without permission, I said. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a public accommodation, she declared. If you're running a business that's open to the public, I have every right to be here. That's not how private property works, Mrs. Henderson. Please leave now, or I'll call the same police officers who were here this morning. She glared at me for a long moment, then stalked back to her Lexus. Before getting in, she turned and pointed at me. This isn't over, not by a long shot. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night, and we'll be discussing this situation in detail. The entire community is behind me on this. She peeled out, spraying more gravel, and I was left standing there feeling like I just survived a hurricane. Several customers approached me, looking concerned. Is everything okay? Asked a young mother with 2 small children. Everything's fine, I assured her. Just a neighbor with some boundary confusion, but I knew it wasn't fine. Patricia Henderson struck me as the type of person who didn't accept defeat gracefully. I called David again and filled him in on the confrontation. She took photos, he asked. Yeah, of everything. The patch, the barn, the customers. That's concerning. She might be building some kind of case. Let me do some research on what legal avenues she might try to pursue. In the meantime, make sure you have documentation for every permit, every license, every piece of paper that authorizes you to do what you're doing. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering documents. Business license, tax registration, agricultural permits, liability insurance, even the health department approval for my farm stand where I sold apples and pears during the regular season. Everything was in order. Everything was legal. That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer and watched the sunset paint the sky orange and purple over my pumpkin patch. The property was beautiful in the autumn light. The old apple trees were heavy with fruit. The pear orchard was thriving after the restoration work I'd done, and the pumpkins glowed like little orange beacons in the failing light. My phone rang. It was my sister, Sarah. Hey, I just got the weirdest email, she said. Some woman named Patricia Henderson claiming she's the HOA president and demanding documentation of our property ownership. Yeah, about that, I said, and filled her in on the day's events. She emailed me. How did she even get my address? Property records are public. She probably looked up the deed and found your name as one of the original beneficiaries before you signed over your share. Can she do that? Just harass us like this? Apparently, she can do whatever she wants until someone stops her. David's handling it legally, but I have a feeling this is going to get worse before it gets better. Sarah sighed. Do you need me to come out there? I can take a few days off work. No, I've got it under control, but thanks for offering. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness and tried to understand Patricia Henderson's motivation. Was it really about property values and community standards, or was something else driving her crusade? The pumpkin patch was modest, well-maintained, and only generating moderate traffic. It wasn't like I was running a carnival or hosting rowdy events. The next morning, I was up early to check the irrigation system when I noticed something odd. Several of my pumpkins nearest the road had been vandalized. Someone had smashed them in the night, leaving orange pulp and seeds scattered across the ground. I counted 12 destroyed pumpkins, all of them in the section most visible from the main road. I took photos and called the non-emergency police number to file a report. Officer Chen showed up about an hour later. "This is pretty brazen," she said, examining the damage. "Right next to a public road where anyone driving by could have seen them." "It happened between midnight and 5 in the morning," I said. "That's when I usually check this section." "Do you have security cameras?" "Not yet, but I'm installing some today." Officer Chen wrote up the report and gave me a case number. "Keep an eye out for any more incidents. If this is part of a pattern, it could constitute criminal harassment." After she left, I drove into town and bought 4 wireless security cameras with night vision. I spent the afternoon installing them strategically around the property, focusing on the areas most vulnerable to tampering. The whole time, I kept thinking about Patricia's visit yesterday and her parting threat. It seemed like too much of a coincidence that my pumpkins were vandalized the very next day. That evening, I decided to attend the emergency HOA meeting Patricia had mentioned. It was being held at the Riverside Meadows Community Center, a fancy building with a stone facade and professional landscaping. I arrived at 7, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, and walked into a room full of hostile faces. Patricia stood at the front, next to a projection screen showing photos of my property. When she saw me, her expression went from surprise to furious. "You have no right to be here," she declared. "This is a closed meeting for HOA members only." "I believe you're discussing my property," I said calmly. "I have every right to hear what you're planning." A man in his 50s, wearing a polo shirt with a corporate logo, stood up. "Let him stay. If we're going to take action, he should at least know what we're talking about." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but several other residents nodded in agreement. Reluctantly, she gestured to an empty chair in the back. I sat down and waited. "As I was saying," Patricia continued, clicking to the next slide, which showed my pumpkin patch from the road. "This commercial operation has been causing significant disruption to our community. Increased traffic, parking issues, and a general degradation of our neighborhood's character." "I don't see how a pumpkin patch affects us," said a woman in her 30s. "It's kind of cute, actually. My kids have been begging me to take them." "It's not about whether it's cute, Nicole," Patricia said sharply. "It's about maintaining standards. We all paid premium prices to live in a well-managed community, and now we have a farm operating right at our doorstep." "But it's not at our doorstep," said another resident. "It's on separate property. I looked it up after your email. Morrison Orchards has been there for decades." "The principle remains the same," Patricia insisted. "His activities are affecting our quality of life." The man in the polo shirt spoke up again. "Patricia, I've driven past that pumpkin patch a dozen times. It's well maintained, the traffic is minimal, and honestly, it's kind of nice having a local farm nearby. Better than another strip mall." "Thank you, Greg," Patricia said in a tone that made it clear she didn't appreciate his input. "But we need to think about the long-term implications. Today it's pumpkins. Tomorrow it could be a corn maze, a petting zoo, or who knows what else. All of which would be perfectly legal on agricultural property, I said from the back of the room. Patricia whirled to face me. This isn't your meeting, Mr. Morrison. You made it about me, Mrs. Henderson. And since you seem to be confused about property rights, let me clarify something. Morrison Orchards has been operating continuously since 1947. We're grandfathered in under every zoning ordinance in the county. We have agricultural designation, which means I can grow crops, raise livestock, operate farm stands, host educational tours, and pretty much anything else that falls under agricultural use. Your HOA has absolutely no authority over my land, and your community standards don't extend 1 inch beyond your property boundaries. The room fell silent. Several residents looked uncomfortable, while others nodded thoughtfully. Furthermore, I continued, standing up, last night someone vandalized my property, destroying 12 pumpkins. I've filed a police report and installed security cameras. If anyone here knows anything about that, now would be a good time to speak up. Patricia's face had gone pale, but she quickly recovered. Are you accusing members of this community of criminal activity? I'm stating facts. My pumpkins were destroyed hours after you threatened me and said this wasn't over. I'll let others draw their own conclusions. Greg stood up. Patricia, I think we need to table this discussion. If there's been property damage and police involvement, this isn't something the HOA should be pursuing. I second that, said Nicole. We haven't had a formal motion, Patricia protested. I move that we table this matter indefinitely, Greg said formally. Second, said Nicole. All in favor? Asked a gray-haired man who I assumed was the HOA secretary. A majority of hands went up. Patricia looked around the room with barely contained rage. Fine, she snapped. But this doesn't change anything. I'll be pursuing this matter through other channels. I left the meeting feeling somewhat vindicated, but I knew Patricia wasn't going to give up. On my drive home, I called David and updated him on the situation. The vandalism is concerning, he said. That's criminal destruction of property. If it happens again, especially now that you have cameras, you'll have grounds for a restraining order. Against Patricia, against whoever's doing it. But yes, if you can establish a pattern of harassment originating from her, a restraining order is definitely possible. The next few days passed without incident. My pumpkin patch continued to do steady business, and I spent my time maintaining the orchards and planning for the next growing season. The security cameras didn't catch anything suspicious, and I started to relax a little. Then, on Friday morning, I found a letter from the county planning department in my mailbox. Someone had filed a formal complaint alleging that I was operating a commercial entertainment venue without proper permits. The letter requested that I appear at a hearing the following Wednesday to address the allegations. I immediately called David. This has Patricia written all over it, he said after I read him the letter. Don't worry. Bring all your documentation to the hearing. I'll be there with you. The county knows the difference between a farm stand and an entertainment venue. This is getting ridiculous, I said. How much time and money is she going to cost me? Unfortunately, these harassment campaigns are designed to do exactly that. She's hoping you'll get tired of fighting and just shut down. But you have the law on your side, Xavier. We'll get through this. Wednesday arrived, and I met David at the county planning department. We were ushered into a conference room where 3 planning commissioners sat behind a long table. Patricia was already there with her own lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. The lead commissioner, a woman named Margaret Foster, reviewed the complaint. Mr. Morrison, You're accused of operating a commercial entertainment venue on agricultural property without proper permits. Specifically, a seasonal attraction described as a pumpkin patch with hay rides, corn maze, and petting zoo. That's completely false, I said. I have a simple you pick pumpkin patch. No hay rides, no corn maze, no petting zoo. Customers walk through, select pumpkins, and pay at an unmanned cash box. It's identical to any farm stand operation. Do you have photos documenting your operation? Commissioner Foster asked. I pulled out my phone and showed recent photos of the pumpkin patch. David also submitted printed photographs into the record. As you can see, David said, this is a straightforward agricultural operation. Mr. Morrison grows pumpkins and allows customers to purchase them directly. This falls well within the permitted uses for property zoned agricultural. Patricia's lawyer, who introduced himself as Richard Thornton, cleared his throat. The issue isn't whether the operation is technically agricultural, but whether the volume of traffic and commercial activity has transformed the property into a de facto commercial venue. That's absurd, David countered. Agricultural properties are specifically allowed to sell their products directly to consumers. That's been true for as long as zoning laws have existed. The volume of traffic is irrelevant as long as the underlying use is agricultural. Commissioner Foster looked at Patricia. Mrs. Henderson, do you have evidence of activities beyond simple pumpkin sales? I have testimony from residents who claim they've seen large groups of people, heard loud music, and observed other indications of entertainment activities, Patricia said. Testimony or rumors? I asked. Because I can tell you definitively that there's no music, no entertainment, nothing but pumpkins in a field. Let's address this systematically, said Commissioner Foster. She turned to me. Mr. Morrison, do you provide hay rides? No. Do you have a corn maze? No. Petting zoo? No. Any form of entertainment beyond allowing people to walk through and select pumpkins? None whatsoever. Commissioner Foster looked at her fellow commissioners and they conferred quietly for a moment. Based on the evidence presented, she said finally, we find no violation of county ordinances. Mr. Morrison is operating a permitted agricultural use on properly zoned land. The complaint is dismissed. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. You're not even considering the impact on our community. Mrs. Henderson, Commissioner Foster said firmly, the impact on your community is not a factor in determining whether agricultural activities are permitted on agricultural land. Mr. Morrison has complied with all relevant regulations. This matter is closed. Richard Thornton put a hand on Patricia's arm, clearly trying to get her to sit down and stay quiet, but she shook him off. I'll take this to the state level if I have to, she declared. This is not over. Outside the building, David pulled me aside. She's getting desperate. That's actually a good sign. She's running out of official channels to pursue. So what does she do next? Hard to say. But keep those cameras running and document everything. If she crosses any legal lines, we'll have her. I drove home feeling exhausted. It had been less than 2 weeks since this whole thing started, and I was already tired of fighting. All I'd wanted to do was grow pumpkins and restore my family's farm. Instead, I was spending my time at county hearings and dealing with a vindictive HOA president who couldn't accept that her authority had limits. That weekend, the pumpkin patch was busier than ever. Word had apparently spread about the controversy, and people were coming out to support me. I had customers telling me they'd heard about the HOA trying to shut me down and wanted to buy pumpkins as a show of solidarity. It was heartwarming, but also a reminder of how quickly things could escalate. On Saturday afternoon, a news van from a local TV station pulled up. A reporter named Jessica Martinez, no relation to Officer Martinez, approached with a cameraman in tow. Mr. Morrison: I'm Jessica Martinez from KVLY News. We've heard about your situation with the HOA, and we'd love to do a story. David to the people versus Goliath. Local farmer fighting to preserve his family heritage, that kind of thing. I hesitated. I don't know if publicity is the best idea right now. I understand your concern, but stories like this tend to resolve faster when there's public awareness. HOAs often back down when they realize they're on the wrong side of public opinion. Let me call my lawyer, I said. David was surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea. She's right. Public pressure can be very effective. And it might prevent Patricia from trying anything else if she knows people are watching. So I agreed to the interview. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about the farm's history, my decision to plant pumpkins, and Patricia's campaign against me. I tried to be fair and factual, not attacking Patricia personally, but making it clear that I was simply trying to operate my family farm without interference. The story aired on Sunday evening news. I didn't watch it live, but friends started texting me immediately. By Monday morning, the segment had been shared hundreds of times on social media. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. People praised the farm, criticized HOA overreach, and generally came down on my side. But there was also backlash. Some residents of Riverside Meadows posted angry comments defending Patricia and claiming I was bringing crime and congestion to their neighborhood. Patricia herself posted a long statement on the neighborhood's Facebook page, painting herself as a dedicated public servant trying to protect her community from commercial exploitation. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find that someone had spray painted "Close Down" in orange letters across my barn. They'd also cut through the fence on the eastern boundary of my property, the side closest to Riverside Meadows, allowing several sections of wire to collapse. This time, I didn't just call the police. I called the news station too. Officer Martinez responded again, along with a detective named Sarah Reeves. They photographed everything while Jessica and her cameraman documented the damage. This is escalating, Detective Reeves said. First the smashed pumpkins, now vandalism and property damage. Do your security cameras cover this area? Not the barn, but I have one that covers the eastern fence line. I pulled up the footage on my phone, and we watched as two figures in dark clothing approached the fence around 3 in the morning. They worked quickly, cutting through the wire in several places. The camera angle made it hard to identify them clearly, but their builds and movements suggested they were relatively young, maybe teenagers or young adults. Can you get me that footage? Detective Reeves asked. I'll email it to you right now. She gave me her card and email address. I'm going to be straight with you, Mr. Morrison. This has all the hallmarks of a coordinated harassment campaign. Between the timing, the escalation, and the context of your dispute with the HOA, I think someone is either directing these attacks or encouraging them. You mean Patricia Henderson? I mean someone. Without direct evidence, I can't point fingers. But I'm going to be having some conversations with HOA leadership and with residents of that development. In the meantime, consider increasing your security measures. More cameras, motion sensor lights, maybe even hiring private security if you can afford it. The story about the vandalism aired that evening, and the public response was even stronger than before. Local farmers' organizations reached out to offer support. The Washington State Farm Bureau issued a statement condemning harassment of agricultural operations. Even the mayor of Apple Valley, a town of about 15,000 people, made comments supporting the right of farmers to operate without interference. Through all of this, I kept working. Pumpkins still needed to be harvested. The orchard still needed maintenance. Life on a farm doesn't stop just because you're dealing with a crazy HOA president. On Wednesday, David called with interesting news. Detective Reeves contacted me. They've identified the two people who vandalized your barn. 17-year-old twin brothers named Jason and Kyle Henderson. Henderson, as in Patricia Henderson, her nephews, they live with her. Parents are deployed overseas with the military. I sat down heavily. So Patricia's been using her own nephews to harass me. Well, that's the question. The boys claim they acted on their own, that Patricia didn't know anything about it. But Detective Reeves isn't buying it. She's looking into Patricia's phone records and social media messages to see if there's evidence of coordination. What happens to the boys? Juvenile charges for vandalism and destruction of property. Since they're minors and first-time offenders, they'll probably get community service and restitution. But if there's evidence that Patricia directed or encouraged them, she could face serious charges. Conspiracy to commit vandalism, contributing to the delinquency of minors, possibly even organized harassment. How long will the investigation take? Could be weeks, could be months. But in the meantime, Reeves suggested that you might want to pursue a civil restraining order against Patricia. With the pattern of behavior and the family connection to the vandals, you've got a strong case. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just let the police handle everything and stay out of it. But another part of me recognized that Patricia wasn't going to stop unless she was forced to stop. Let's do it, I said. File for the restraining order. The next few days were busy with legal preparations. David filed the petition for a restraining order, and a hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, I reinforced my security measures. Fred Martinson, my Christmas tree farmer neighbor, lent me some industrial lighting equipment which I used to illuminate the entire perimeter of my property at night. I installed 4 more cameras, covering every possible approach. I also hired a kid from town, a college student named Trevor who needed extra money, to do overnight security shifts on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights when I was most vulnerable to vandalism. Nothing happened on his watch, but his presence was reassuring. Patricia must have known about the restraining order hearing because she hired a new lawyer. Richard Thornton, apparently recognizing a losing battle, had withdrawn from representing her. Her new attorney was a woman named Barbara Craymore who specialized in criminal defense. The hearing took place in front of Judge Thomas Palmer, a no-nonsense man in his 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years. David presented our case methodically, walking through the timeline of events, Patricia's threats and harassment, the vandalism, and the connection to her nephews. Barbara Craymore argued that Patricia had no direct involvement in the vandalism, and that her attempts to address concerns about the pumpkin patch through official channels were protected speech and legitimate civic engagement. Your Honor, David countered, there's a clear pattern here. Mrs. Henderson initiated a campaign of harassment the moment Mr. Morrison opened his pumpkin patch. She called the police making false reports. She filed frivolous complaints with the county. She attended his property uninvited and threatened him. And now we have vandalism committed by her own nephews, who live under her roof and presumably under her influence. Judge Palmer looked at Patricia. Mrs. Henderson, did you encourage your nephews to vandalize Mr. Morrison's property? Absolutely not, Your Honor. I was shocked when I learned what they'd done. Did you express negative opinions about Mr. Morrison or his farm in their presence? Patricia hesitated. I may have discussed the situation at home. I'm the HOA president. It's a significant community issue. That's not what I asked. Did you express negative opinions about Mr. Morrison or his farm in front of your nephews? Yes, but I never told them to do anything. Did you know they'd vandalized the property before the police identified them? Another hesitation. I suspected. The judge made a note. Why didn't you come forward with that information? I wasn't certain. I didn't want to falsely accuse them. Judge Palmer didn't look convinced. He reviewed some papers in front of him, then looked up. Here's what I see. Mr. Morrison is operating a legitimate agricultural business on property his family has owned for decades. Mrs. Henderson has systematically attempted to interfere with that operation through various means, some legitimate, some questionable. Whether or not she directly ordered the vandalism, her campaign of harassment created an environment that led to it. I'm granting the restraining order. Mrs. Henderson, you are to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Morrison, his property, and his business operations. No contact, direct or indirect. This order remains in effect for 1 year, at which point it can be renewed if necessary. Do you understand? Patricia's face was red. Yes, Your Honor. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review. If there's evidence of criminal conspiracy or other offenses, they'll pursue appropriate charges. We left the courthouse, and I felt like I could finally breathe. David patted me on the shoulder. That went about as well as it could have. With the restraining order in place, she can't contact you or come near your property. If she violates it, she'll be arrested. What about the HOA? She can still be president, but she can't use her position to harass you. If the HOA takes any action against you, it could be seen as violating the spirit of the restraining order, and she could face contempt charges. So it's really over. The immediate crisis is over, but keep your guard up. People like Patricia don't always accept defeat gracefully. October rolled into November, and the pumpkin season wound down naturally. I'd sold almost all my inventory, and what remained was starting to show signs of rot. I plowed the remaining pumpkins back into the soil and started planning for winter. The Riverside Meadows HOA had gone quiet. According to Fred, who kept his ear to the ground, there'd been an emergency meeting where several board members called for Patricia's resignation. She'd refused, but her support was crumbling. Many residents were embarrassed by the publicity, and the revelation that the HOA president's nephews had committed vandalism. Jason and Kyle Henderson pled guilty to misdemeanor vandalism charges. They were sentenced to 100 hours of community service each, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage they'd caused. As part of their sentence, the judge ordered them to complete anger management counseling and write formal apologies to me. I received those apologies in early December. They were handwritten and seemed genuine. The boys explained that they'd been angry about my criticism of their aunt, whom they loved and respected, and had acted impulsively to defend her. They acknowledged that what they'd done was wrong and expressed genuine remorse. I wrote back to both of them, accepting their apologies and wishing them well. They were just kids who'd made a mistake. I didn't hold it against them. The district attorney's investigation into Patricia took longer. Detective Reeves interviewed numerous witnesses, reviewed phone records and social media messages, and built a case. In late January, Patricia Henderson was charged with conspiracy to commit vandalism, criminal harassment, and making false statements to law enforcement. The false statements charge stemmed from her initial police complaint, where she'd claimed my pumpkin patch extended into HOA common areas. The DA's office argued that she'd knowingly made false statements with the intent to interfere with my business operations. The case went to trial in March. I had to testify. recounting the entire sequence of events from Patricia's first confrontation to the vandalism to the restraining order hearing. It was exhausting and stressful, but David coached me through it. Patricia's defense team argued that she'd been acting in good faith as HOA president, and that any errors in judgment didn't rise to the level of criminal behavior. They portrayed her as a dedicated community volunteer who'd been overzealous in protecting her neighborhood. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was in April. Judge Palmer, the same judge who'd granted the restraining order, presided. He sentenced Patricia to 6 months in county jail, suspended, 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $5,000. He also ordered her to resign from her position as HOA president. Mrs. Henderson, the judge said, you abused a position of authority and responsibility to conduct a campaign of harassment against a law-abiding citizen. You enlisted minors in criminal activity. You made false statements to law enforcement and wasted public resources with frivolous complaints. The court takes these matters very seriously. Consider yourself fortunate that you're not serving actual jail time. I watched Patricia leave the courtroom, her face drawn and pale. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served, certainly. Relief that the ordeal was finally over. But also a kind of sad recognition that none of this had been necessary. If she just accepted that my farm was my business and not hers to control, none of this would have happened. Spring arrived and Morrison Orchards came back to life. The apple trees blossomed in clouds of white and pink. The pear orchard flourished. I planted a larger vegetable garden this year, including a substantial pumpkin patch that I was already planning for next October. The Riverside Meadows HOA elected a new president, a retired accountant named Gerald Foster who reached out to me in May with an olive branch. We met for coffee in town, and he apologized for everything that had happened under Patricia's leadership. Most of us are just regular people who want to live peacefully, Gerald said. Patricia's approach was toxic, and we're trying to reset the relationship between the HOA and the broader community. If there are ever issues that affect both of us, I'd like to think we can work them out like adults. I'd appreciate that, I said, and I meant it. In June, the local farmers market invited me to be a regular vendor. I started selling apples, pears, vegetables, and fresh eggs from the chickens I'd recently acquired. The farm was becoming profitable again, not just surviving but thriving. Fred Martinson and I developed a good partnership. I helped him with his Christmas tree season, and he helped me with harvest. We became friends, 2 farmers supporting each other against whatever challenges came our way. In August, I got a surprise visit from Jason and Kyle Henderson. They'd completed their community service and probation, and they asked if I might be willing to hire them for part-time work. Patricia had moved away after her conviction, unable to face the community, and the boys were living with their parents, who'd returned from deployment. We want to make things right, Jason said. Not just because the court ordered restitution, but because we know we were wrong. If you're willing to give us a chance, we'll work hard. I thought about it. They were 18 now, heading off to college in the fall, and they seemed genuinely remorseful. Okay, I said. You can help with the harvest season. Minimum wage to start, and we'll see how it goes. They proved to be excellent workers, diligent and uncomplaining even during the long, hot days of apple harvest. By the end of summer, I'd come to respect them. They'd made a mistake, paid for it, and learned from it. That was more than many people could say. October came around again, and I opened my pumpkin patch for the second year. This time, there was no drama, No HOA complaints, no vandalism. Just families picking pumpkins, kids running through the rows, and the quiet satisfaction of a harvest well earned. On Halloween night, I stood on my porch with a bowl of candy, watching trick-or-treaters from Riverside Meadows and other neighborhoods parade past. Several parents stopped to thank me for growing such beautiful pumpkins. A few even mentioned that they'd followed the whole saga and were glad things had worked out. As the evening wound down and the last trick-or-treaters headed home, I looked out over Morrison Orchards, 78 years of family history and hard work. My grandfather would have been proud, I thought, not just of the farm itself, but of the way I'd fought to preserve it. I'd learned some important lessons over the past year. I'd learned that property rights matter, that documentation is crucial, and that standing up to bullies, even official ones, is sometimes necessary. I'd learned that communities can be complicated, that not all neighbors are friendly, but that most people are fundamentally decent when given the chance. Most importantly, I'd learned that Morrison Orchards wasn't just a piece of land. It was a legacy, a testament to generations of hard work, and a promise to future generations that some things are worth fighting for. The restraining order against Patricia expired that December, but she never returned to Apple Valley. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Arizona to live near her sister. The Riverside Meadows HOA continued under Gerald's sensible leadership, focusing on actual community improvement rather than territorial disputes. Jason and Kyle Henderson both went off to college, but they came back during breaks to help with the farm. They'd become part of the Morrison Orchards extended family, proof that people could change and that forgiveness was possible. As winter settled in and I planned for the next growing season, I sat in my grandfather's old office, surrounded by decades of farm records and family photos. The land stretched out beyond the windows, dormant but full of potential. In a few months, the cycle would begin again. Trees would blossom, crops would grow, and Morrison Orchards would continue the tradition that had sustained my family for nearly 8 decades. The HOA had tried to shut me down over a pumpkin patch, unaware that the entire orchard and everything around it belonged to me. They'd learned that lesson the hard way through police reports and court hearings and criminal convictions. But in the end, justice had prevailed and the farm had survived. I thought about next October and the pumpkin patch I'd plant. Maybe I'd expand it, add a few more acres. Maybe I'd diversify, try some new varieties. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time since moving back home, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. Morrison Orchards had weathered storms before, literal and figurative. It had survived the Depression, multiple recessions, changes in agricultural technology, and shifts in consumer preferences. It had survived my father's illness and years of neglect, and now it had survived Patricia Henderson and her misguided crusade. The farm would continue as it always had, because some things are too important to give up. Land, family, tradition, the simple dignity of growing food and sharing it with your community. These weren't just business principles. They were values worth defending. As I locked up the office and headed toward the house, I paused to look up at the winter stars. Somewhere out there my grandfather was probably watching, and I hoped he approved of how I'd handled things. I'd protected his legacy, stood my ground against those who would have taken it away, and ensured that Morrison Orchards would be here for another generation. That was enough. That was everything.